Before Saturday's action, there was a big old traffic jam atop the SEC standings. But thanks to Tennessee and Auburn laying eggs on the road, things are decidedly less jam-packed today.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We are your hosts. This beautiful human being over here to my side is Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Shade, and we are elated to be with you today on Monday, coming off the Super Bowl. Friends, this episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free right now at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome into you everydayers in particular. So glad you're here. If you're a newcomer or visitor to the show, welcome into you as well. Andy, we got a ton to get through on today's show, so we're going to have to fly through a lot of this. But as we get into it, Andy, we're recording just a couple hours before the Super Bowl kicks off. But if it were the day of the national championship game for us in college basketball, it would be many hours before it tipped off. Andy, annual soapbox for me. Super Bowl kicks off at 6:30 Eastern time. Why in all of God's green goodness does the college basketball national championship game not tip until 9:20 Eastern time? That's bonkers. I'm an old man and I got to get to bed. But if we want to rope in a new generation of fans, why on earth is the game happening at a time when young fans can't sit up to watch all of it, particularly on the East Coast and in Central Time? NCAA, please fix this. Okay, off my soapbox. Let's get into the SEC. Andy, coming into Saturday, there was a four-way tie for first place in the loss column of the SEC. That was Alabama, South Carolina, and Auburn all had identical records. Tennessee, same in the loss column, just one fewer wins because they've played one fewer games. But here's what happens. Auburn and Tennessee both lose, Andy. And oh, by the way, Kentucky loses again at home in Rupp to Gonzaga. We'll get to all of those in just a second. But Auburn and Tennessee, they get handled on the road. I mean, handled on the road. Tennessee loses at A&M 85-69. Auburn loses at Florida 81-65. For both teams, it's their first double-digit loss of the season. They'd played close games. Crazy stuff. But Alabama and South Carolina, they take care of business. The Crimson Tide wins at LSU. Were down at one point, then came back and reeled it off. South Carolina took care of Vandy at home, as you expect. So, Andy, the result here is that now the Crimson Tide and Gamecocks are by themselves atop the SEC. Auburn's a game back. Tennessee a game and a half back. Kentucky 2.5 games back. Andy, what do you make of this whole mess of the SEC?
Yeah, it's been a really wild year in the SEC, and I think part of it is teams just there's more depth in the conference than we've seen in the past. Part of that is a team like South Carolina kind of rising up the ranks. Alabama has been a little better than people expected them to be. Certainly, there have been some disappointing teams like Arkansas and Missouri and a handful of others. But I think what's happening is teams are just having a hard time stringing together multiple wins. And you look at Auburn. I mean, they have this big, emotional, heavy win over Alabama, their rival. They come out and they go on the road to take on a good Florida team, a technical Florida team, very analytical in Todd Golden's mind. And I think that they just couldn't execute. It was a bit of a hangover situation for them.
And we talked about that Friday. We cautioned in the same way that North Carolina coming off of the Duke victory, and it happened to Auburn too.
Yeah, and for Tennessee, I mean, it was kind of a lot of the story we've seen from them. Dalton Connect, I think he had 22 points. I think he made 6 of their 8 3-pointers in that game. But if I remember correctly, non-Dalton Connect players for Tennessee shot a combined 2 of 18 from 3 against Texas A&M. Wade Taylor has a good game. Like, there's just not a lot of easy games in the SEC. And for Tennessee, a team that has kind of avoided a lot of these ugly losses, both Tennessee and Auburn have managed to do that. They for a while, at least in Auburn's case, they didn't have a lot of big wins, but they were avoiding those bad losses. But it was going to always kind of catch up to them. The fact that it happened on the same day in kind of a similar fashion, similar scores, both on the road against like borderline bubbly teams, but not top 25 caliber programs in Florida and A&M is kind of the same situation. Kentucky, we'll get to that, as a different situation. They were obviously at home. They were not playing an SEC team, but to see all three of those programs drop games that they were all expected to win. I mean, it's just a showcase that the SEC is tough. It's a gauntlet. It's a really challenging schedule. And to see teams like Alabama and South Carolina have been the teams that have kind of risen out of that kind of mess of teams is not expected at all. And it will probably change between now and mid-March, but it has been quite a unique year in that conference so far.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about on Friday and talking about the Tennessee and Texas A&M game. We said, look, Wade Taylor and Tyrese Radford can get going at any time. Mm-hmm. Andy, that duo combined to score 52 of A&M's 85 points. And I think that's probably then the moment for us to switch to the flip side of this. I mean, we're talking about these bigger name, at least this year, SEC teams falling. I think we also need to make sure we look at what does this mean for Texas A&M? What does this mean for Florida? And what does this mean for Gonzaga? And by the way, before we get off of Kentucky, let's remember, this is the first time ever, Andy, that they have a 3-game losing skid at Rupp Arena. They have lost 3 home games in a row before in the Kentucky program, but never in the era in which they've played in Rupp Arena. I mean, that is, that says something incredible about their home consistency through the decades. But my goodness, what a wild thing. So, Andy, let's start with the 2 SEC teams. What does this kind of mean for A&M and Florida?
Yeah, I mean, both 2 teams that are competing to be on that bubble. You know, they're probably not going to win the SEC. They're probably not going to win the SEC championship unless, Wade Taylor goes completely nuclear, which totally could happen. But more than likely, these are teams that are battling to get themselves a spot in the NCAA tournament. These are huge wins for both of these teams. They're both now 6-5. They're tied for 5th in the SEC with each other as well.
6-4, I think, right?
Yes, sorry, 6-4.
Yeah,
they're tied with each other and Kentucky for 5th place in the SEC. Both their resumes have some questionable stuff. Florida's is pretty good. They don't have any bad losses necessarily, but they are 2-7 in quad 1 games. So I think both these teams needed a big resume boosting win. And really, again, we'll get to the Gonzaga side. That's the same spot they were in, but all these teams needed a big win. They needed something that made their resume pop. And in this situation, they all managed to pick it up against SEC teams, against teams that were in that conversation that are quad 1 victories. And I think for A&M and Florida, they don't get to separate from each other, which is a bit of a problem because they're going to probably be competing for potentially only 1 spot. Maybe not, but that wouldn't be surprising to me if that ends up being a reality where the committee's like, we got to pick one of these SEC teams. And both of them getting this win helps their resume. And it will be interesting to see if either of them can pick up some more of those big wins to kind of separate themselves and secure one of those spots.
And I think that's the thing where there is some slight separation between the two is A&M is better right now, like in terms of quad wins, like 5-4 in quad 1, 3-2 in quad 2, 8-6 combined. Florida is just 2-7, as you said, in quad 1, 5-7 combined in quads 1 and 2. So that's not as good, but where Florida has the upside then on A&M is Florida doesn't have any losses outside of quad 1 and 2. While A&M, Andy, has 2 quad 3 losses. That is a blemish for them. And then when you look at their final 8 games, Florida, to me, has the easier remaining schedule, while A&M's is a little bit more difficult. And so, folks, you can obviously look ahead at their schedules there, but you'll agree when you see that Florida has a little bit easier going than does A&M. Now, obviously, that's less helpful in terms of quality wins, but you know, there's all that. Andy, let's go to the other side of this, because while it's an SEC conversation, thank you again. I know we said this on Friday. Big thanks to Coach Few and Coach Cal for scheduling this game in a day and age where we just don't get these February non-con games anymore. I miss that part of college basketball, Andy. So I'm thankful for this. Just the fact that they'll schedule it now.
Yeah, and not only, I mean, for Mark Few, like this was such a a good decision by his program to do this, to go be willing to play at Rupp Arena in February. The WCC has one less team, so they have more flexibility in their schedule. Before BYU joined the WCC, Gonzaga used to play Memphis frequently in their non-conference schedules. Memphis at that time was coached by John Calipari, so it's not a surprise to see them kind of re-bring this back. And for Mark Few and the Zags, they desperately needed this game. This was the best case scenario for how this plays out for Gonzaga. As they schedule this game in February, they pick it up as a W and use it as some momentum to carry them through the rest of the season and boost their resume. Ideally, they weren't in that position where they needed a resume boosting win to make themselves look more like an NCAA tournament team. That is not a scenario Gonzaga frequently finds themselves in, but they did. And they needed this game. And the fact that it was on the schedule is a testament to Few's willingness to play this game, to Coach Calipari's willingness to play this game as well. And the fact that they went out and picked it up is just monumental. This season for Gonzaga is not going the way that people hoped, but it will always be the year that Gonzaga beat Kentucky at Rupp Arena. This is a 6-year scheduled series between these two teams. Gonzaga's 2-0 already. That is a phenomenal testament to Mark Few's work, to Gonzaga's work. Again, we could spend a very long time on the Kentucky side of this, the 3 straight losses at home, what it means for Calipari, the young players don't seem to be developing, some coaching decisions. There's a lot that could be unpacked.
Rob Dillingham played like 4 minutes in the second half of the
shockingly strange decision to play him the way they did, to not ever change the way they were defending the pick and rolls. Like, it was a really odd coaching game from John Calipari, let's put it that way. But the Zags needed this one. They got it. Kentucky's spiraling in a not so great way right now. We'll see if they can right the ship. But for Gonzaga, they only got 2 more quad 1 games left on their schedule. They're at the very end of the season at San Francisco, at St. Mary's. They got some not as big games in between then. If they can pick those up, keep that momentum rolling, potentially put themselves in a position to earn an at-large, even if they don't win in Vegas against the Gales.
Yeah, I mean, for Gonzaga, any hope for an at-large, got to feel like you got to go 6-0 down the stretch of the regular season. And, hey, make it easy, though. Go out and win the West Coast Conference, and you'd be in better position. Obviously, for Kentucky, again, no Trey Mitchell, right, if I'm remembering correctly in this game. Man, Cats are going to have to figure something out, get things squared away in the SEC.
Isaac, the 13 ranked teams who played unranked teams on the road this weekend, they did finish above 500. Barely. We're going to get to all of that. All that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster, and they do it for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire and gives you access to professionals that you cannot find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. And LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process even easier. They just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process quicker and more efficient. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. If you want to be one of them, post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Isaac, we're going to get to all of the ranked teams that played unranked opponents this weekend. Again, that has been a huge theme this season, is that those ranked teams are just not doing nearly as well on the road as they do historically. We do want to get to a ranked on ranked game that happened in the Big 12. Baylor at Kansas. Kansas secured a victory at home, 64-61. Kansas is really, really tough to beat at Fog Allen Fieldhouse, but if there was ever a situation, it's when they are missing their best player in Kevin McCullar. It is when they're playing arguably the third, best team in the Big 12 in Baylor, a team that has a lot of offensive firepower. This was the opportunity for Kansas to potentially get upset at home. And yet Baylor just unable to get the job done. They had a couple of great looks at 3 in the final seconds, couldn't force overtime. Big hats off to Bill Self and the Jayhawks for getting this done without Kevin McCullar. Nick Timberlake was the player who stepped into the starting lineup, not Elmarco Jackson, interestingly enough. Timberlake, neither of them had a huge impact. He had 8 points on 3 of 8 shooting. Meanwhile, Jackson just had 1 point. He did have 4 steals, but he also picked up 3 fouls. Regardless, Kansas picks up a very big win at home. Baylor had a chance to pick up a really big one, didn't quite get it done. Not a huge problem for the Bears and their resume, but certainly one they wish they could have back.
And it's tough. I mean, Andy, this is one of those games to me where it felt like if we had like 5 more minutes on the clock, and I don't even mean going to overtime, just if it was 5 minutes longer, Baylor probably wins this game because without McCullough, Kansas, as we know, is already a not deep team, and then with DeJuan Harris gimpy after he had turned that ankle, they were up 11. Kansas was with just under 6 minutes to go, and Baylor just starts chipping away a little bit here, a little bit there, gets down to 64, 61. As you said, man, like 2 really, really good looks at it in the final seconds. Who was that? Was it Jaden Nunn that had that? I mean, Jaden Nunn got a look. It was like 10 seconds left from the corner. And I was like, oh, you could not be more wide open, right? Like, I mean, maybe if Kansas ran to the other side, but wild stuff there. And then Jacoby Walter had that shot from the top of the key just right at the end of the game. So, I mean, honestly, you couldn't ask for more if you're Baylor in that situation. I guess you could because you'd want it to go down. But seriously, Andy, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes more on the clock. I think Bears get this win just because of the scenario. And that's a tough pill to swallow. So they're going to have to get back to it. Kansas keeps doing it at home.
Yeah. We had 13 ranked on unranked opponents this weekend on the road. Isaac, they were 6-6 heading into Sunday. All eyes were on the Owls of Florida Atlantic playing Wichita State. Could the Owls pick up a victory and help make these ranked teams finish above 500? They did in overtime. They did not make it easy, but they did manage to secure a relatively comfortable win. I think they had their biggest lead of the entire game in overtime. That was how dominant they were once they finally got into that final frame. But 7-6 overall for those ranked teams. I'm going to quickly rattle off the teams that won, the teams that losses, and then Isaac, the teams that lost. And then Isaac, I'm going to ask you, which of these games do you think was the biggest win for the ranked team and which was the worst loss for the ranked team? We'll just get through the games first. On Friday, the 2 ranked teams 0-2. That was Dayton and San Diego State. Now, the Aztecs were not favored in their game, but still bad start for the ranked teams, 0-2 on Friday. Saturday, 6-4 record. The ranked teams that won on the road: UConn, North Carolina, Houston, Arizona, Alabama, who we talked about, and then Creighton. The teams that lost, obviously, we already talked about Tennessee and Auburn. We also saw Illinois lose to Michigan State, and Wisconsin lost to Rutgers. And then again on Sunday, FAU picked up that win over Wichita State. So, Isaac, among these ranked teams, who do you think had the biggest, best win? What was the win that I think stood out to you of like, this team really needed to pick this one up and they got it done?
Well, what's funny is the way you just phrased that right there at the end is how I answered this question. I'm actually going to go with FAU. As a reminder, they had just lost in overtime to UAB on Thursday. By the way, we didn't get our jinx, Andy, or Oregon ended up winning Thursday night, unfortunately.
I noticed.
Anyway, do what?
I said I noticed. We saw them lose 2 days later, though. So
yeah, exactly. But they had just lost, got a quad 2 loss. Here's the thing for FAU. They've already got a quad 3 and quad 4 loss on their resume. Losing at Wichita State would have been another Q3 loss. Almost gave it away down the stretch, but as you said, I mean, just blitzed the Shockers in OT. It was 21-8. And so, Andy, I know it's biggest win is the question. I think it's just most important avoidance of a loss is why I put FAU here in this spot.
And
what about you? Who'd you go with?
Yeah, it's funny because that's kind of the same logic I used for mine as well, which is I picked Creighton. Creighton beating Xavier. Xavier's obviously a good team, and that's a good win for Creighton. It's a better win than FAU beating Wichita State, but really it was Creighton needing to avoid a loss here because they just lost 2 in a row. They needed to avoid losing a 3rd straight game. Xavier's been playing really well, and Creighton, they picked it up. If they'd lost this game, they'd be in a tie with Butler for 5th place. in the Big East. That is not where we expect this Creighton team to be. Instead, they are now tied with Seton Hall for third in the Big East, which is where they've kind of been throughout the season. So they're still in that conversation right behind UConn and Marquette. They really needed this one, and they got it done. And I think for Xavier, it's a tough loss in terms of their bubble hopes. But I think Creighton was pretty desperate to pick this one up, and they got it done.
Yep. Andy, what about the other side of this? Which loss was the worst or most damaging on the other side of this conversation?
For me, I think it has to be Wisconsin. I mean, Wisconsin's now lost 4 in a row. They've lost 4 in a row. They were getting conversations as a potential number 1 seed. That's where they were at. And then, boom, loss. This loss to Rutgers is the most damaging of all of these. It was a 22-point loss. Yes, it was on the road, but Rutgers is not that good of a team. This is just – I don't think Wisconsin has fully fallen into bubble category, but this is as close to as quick of a this is a potential 1 seed to this is a potential bubble team as I've ever seen. They're not quite there yet. They're probably still safely in the field, but it may not take much more. The Big Ten is not that strong this year. And if Wisconsin stumbles once more, twice more, there's a real chance that they're all of a sudden like, hey, we're not even that secure in the field. So to me, in terms of damaging losses, Wisconsin's is the worst, and it's by a fair amount, I think.
Yeah. For me, that would be my answer. And so I wanted to have another one ready because I was guessing that you'd probably pick Wisconsin as well. So I went with Dayton, just because it kind of for the same thing I was talking about with FAU. Life as a mid-major is hard. So it's not necessarily that this loss is bad, because it is to another, A10 team in VCU that is strong in VCU. But I mean, it is a quad 1 loss, right? And so it's not a bad loss from a resume standpoint, but it's bad just because teams are always looking for, people are always looking for opportunities to poke holes into mid majors. And that's what this allows when you take a loss like this, if you're Dayton. And so I won't call it the worst loss, but I will call it the most damaging. Also, by the way, Andy, 96 combined points in that game, so low scoring. That's wild. But the other thing is this could turn into a Q2 loss pretty quickly because VCU is right on that cut line at 75th. So we'll see what happens with it. But this could be something that just bumps Dayton down a line or two in seeds eventually. And you just hate to see that. Andy, it's time for us to get to our weekly 6-pack. Today, we're going to focus on results from 6 different conferences and what they mean from the bubble. Oh, yes, we're running all around the nation, my friend. But before we get there, I need to tell you that this episode's brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with things like quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. How about Big Mondays lines? Andy, we've got, as always, an ACC game and a Big 12 game. Wake at Duke, Blue Devils favored by 6.5 at home. Kansas at Texas Tech. Not what you would expect here. Red Raiders favored by 1.5. Bonkers. So if you want to get in on that action or anything else, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Andy, it's a conference 6-pack as we wrap up today's show. Instead of 6 individual games, we already talked about the SEC at length earlier, so it'll be the other Power 6 conferences plus the Mountain West. I'm going to start in the Big Ten, where Purdue destroyed Indiana 79-59. Remember, the Hoosiers won this game last year at Purdue. My goodness, Zach Edey, I love this. Hits the first career 3 for him. Comes back down the court, Andy. It was so fun to watch. He was just so happy. His teammates were all happy for him. Love to see that. But this is the first time that Purdue has beat Indiana by 20 plus twice in a season since 1933, Andy. For Indiana, I mean, the bubble hopes are essentially dead and gone and buried and eulogized and all that. 6-7 in Big Ten play, 14-10 overall. They are just 1-8 in quad 1 games. And currently, as we record, number 100 in the net. Andy, let me just, I know we mentioned this team in the ranked teams on the road at unranked in Illinois losing, but got to mention what a big win this is for Michigan State, 88-80 over Illinois. And quite frankly, was maybe my favorite game of Saturday. That was an electric game to watch there in the Breslin Center. Lots of fun.
Moving over to the Big East, a pair of results that have some bubble implications here. Marquette takes down St. John's. Obviously, Marquette is safe, but for St. John's, they've been really needing to pick up some of these marquee Big East games, and they just have not been able to do it. They were up 9 at halftime in this game, Isaac. They got outscored by 20 in the second half from Shaka Smart's team, 48-28, suffer another loss. Rick Pitino's team is now 6-7 in the Big East. They're just 2-8 in quad one games. They're 12-2 otherwise, but that 2-8 record in quad one games, they're 45th in the net. This is a team that feels like they're just a couple points away from a few 1-point losses that if they had gone the other way, maybe they're in that conversation. But right now it's feeling a little precarious for them. And then on the other side in the Big East, Butler beats Providence. And this felt like a really good bubble game where both teams are kind of fighting for a spot in that bubble conversation, in that at-large conversation. Butler gets the win by 3, 75-72 at home. They're now 7-6 in the Big East, but they are 16-8 overall. They're 50th in the net, 12-1 outside of quad one games, but just 3-7. So they're still kind of maybe not quite in that conversation, but close for Providence. They've had a tough time since the Bryce Hopkins injury. 6-7 in the Big East for them, 15-9 overall. They have lost 3 of their last 4. Granted, the one win was against Creighton, which helps them out. But both these teams feel like they're kind of fighting for a spot in that bubble conversation. Butler gets themselves a big win here.
Andy, let's move to the ACC, where 3 teams did very well for themselves. It's a good day for the conference. Wake Forest beats NC State 83-79, 33 points in this game for Hunter Shallis. That's the team, Andy, that for me, and I think most bracketologists, is currently on the outside looking in. I'll say something else about them in a second. But 2 teams that I would have in the tournament right now, and I think this just went a long way to help them kind of start solidifying that. Virginia wins over Florida State, 80-76. That was on the road, right? That was down in Tallahassee. Isaac McNeely, 29 points, 5 of 7 from 3. Great stuff. Reese Beekman chipped in 21 himself. And then Clemson, Andy, critically followed up their win at North Carolina earlier in the week with another road win up at Syracuse, 77-68. Big day for PJ Hall, 15 points, 10 rebounds, 3 blocks. Maybe Clemson is turning this thing back around. Virginia and Clemson, to me, is feeling pretty safe right now, but they got to keep going. Wake Forest, not in, but they've got a massive opportunity kicking off Big Monday as they go to Duke. And as we just said, obviously Duke favored by 6.5. Could Wake, like Gonzaga this weekend, pick up their first quad one win of the season?
Moving over to the Big 12, a trio of games here to discuss. Iowa State takes down TCU 71-59, the final score there. BYU beats Kansas State 72-66, and then Texas Tech takes down Central Florida 66-59. In terms of what these games mean for the bubble, Iowa State's not a bubbly team, but they do keep pace with Houston. They're still only a half game back right there. Meanwhile, TCU and Kansas State both miss opportunities to pick up games that would have really helped solidify their spot on the resume. Every time it seems like Kansas State is putting themselves in a position to potentially push into that bubble conversation, they lose a game that they can't lose. It's not a shame to lose to BYU. They're a good team. They're ranked for a reason, but you've got to pick up those kind of games if you want to put yourself in that bubble conversation. Meanwhile, for Texas Tech, this was more of a loss avoidance situation for them. They could not lose to Central Florida. That would have been really devastating for their bubble hopes, for their chances of staying in that kind of top conversation in the rankings in the Big 12. Tech now has a really big opportunity as well. You talked about Wake and Duke. The next game on Big Monday is Texas Tech going on the road hosting Kansas. Kansas has not been good on the road. If Texas Tech can win at home, they're currently favored at FanDuel. That is a monster opportunity for the Red Raiders to pick up a huge marquee win and really solidify their spot in the tournament and make some real noise in the Big 12 standings as well.
Andy, let's move to the Pac-12, where 2 bids, 3 bids, who knows what's going to happen there. Arizona is obviously a lock at the complete, upper top end of the sport. And then a couple others, it's like, what's going on? Washington State wins at Oregon on Saturday, 62-56. For Oregon, this is not good. They are probably in a point now where they're going to need that Pac-12 auto bid. in order to do it. 61st in the net, 2-4 in quad 1, 3-3 in quad 2. Oh, and by the way, they've got a quad 4 loss. Washington State, on the other hand, is the team that's now looking a little bit better on the bubble. They've won 8 of 9. They're 40th in the net, 4-3 in quad 1, 4-2 in quad 2, 3-1 in quad 3. And I think coming into the weekend, Joe Lenardi already had them as like a Dayton team last 4 in. So maybe this moves them into last 4 buys. By the way, Arizona State beats Utah. Tough for Utah, who was coming off that 3 OT loss to Arizona. That would have been huge for the Utes. And then for Colorado, Andy, I can't figure out the Buffs. They've got like 2 first-round draft picks on their team. And here they are just getting blitzed by 20 at to Arizona's 99-79. That was at home too, right? If I remember correctly. So tough
when they lost them on the road, I think by like 45 or whatever that.
Oh gosh, that's right, man. So anyway, Colorado, man, it's tough.
Closing out the show on the West Coast, 2 bubble teams in the Mountain West took not so good losses, hurting their chances of making the field. Mountain West has continually had 5 or 6 teams potentially in that field, but we knew that anybody could slip a little bit, and that's all it would take, especially as a mid-major conference. Boise State gets crushed by Utah State. Huge win for the Aggies, who've looked fantastic all year long, slipped up a little bit the last couple of weeks, but then turn around and get a 19-point win over Leon Rice and the Broncos. Meanwhile, UNLV, kind of one of those sneaky teams that's not in that top conversation in the Mountain West, but is capable of playing spoiler in a major way. They do exactly that, beating New Mexico, the Lobos, at the pit. They don't lose at home very often at New Mexico, and UNLV gets a 3-point win there. For Boise State and New Mexico, the kind of losses that are going to knock you down at least a spot in whether you're last team in to first team out, whatever it may be in that bubble conversation. And these 2 teams, there's just not a lot of wiggle room for them to keep themselves in that conversation as a bubble team. And these are tough losses for both of them to take. Isaac, that is going to wrap it up for us today. We love these Monday shows, getting an opportunity to cover as many things as we could possibly get to that happened over the weekend. Fantastic slate of games on Monday with those 2 big Monday games. We will, of course, be reviewing those games on Tuesday's show and getting you ready for the rest of the week as we get closer and closer to March Madness. Want to thank all of you for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Remind you to join us on our Discord channel. There is a link in the show notes on audio and video platforms. Click on that and come hang out with us 24/7. Until Tuesday, apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats and peace out.